Leviticus 10 through 18. We did cover chapters 1 through 9 last week. So in chapter 10, we see Aaron's sons called Nadab and Abihu, and they commit an offense and they get punished for it. I've got a little scripture on the top right there, and it says, oops, I'm going to move it. Let's see here. Okay. So Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, offered an authorized fire before Tatanzambi, and they were consumed by the fire as a punishment. You can see at the corner there, verse 1 and 2 of chapter 10, it says, And Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer, and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before Tatanzambi, which he commanded them not. So they were doing this without being told to do that. And there went out fire from Tatanzambi and devoured them, and they died before Tatanzambi. So it was not something to take lightly, these laws that Tatanzambi was giving. Oops. Mr. Matridi, go ahead and mute yourself. Thank you. All right. So what else happens in chapter 10? Oops. Okay, guys, let's go ahead and mute our buttons. Actually, let me set somebody else as. Okay, let me do this. All right, please mute yourself so that I don't get interruptions. Okay, I'll start again. Leviticus chapter 10 is the scene of Nadab and Abihu. And we see that they offer an authorized fire before Tatanzambi, and they're consumed by the fire as a punishment. What else happens to them? Moses instructs Aaron and his remaining sons not to mourn publicly. Boy, that's a tough one. Moses was told by Tatanzambi, tell Aaron he's not to mourn because he didn't tell those kids to do what they did. We are also given regulations, or regulations are given regarding the consumption of sacrificial offering by the priests. So this chapter talks about who could eat what out of the sacrifices, whether it was the sin offering or the peace offering and so on and so forth. That is chapter 10. Again, I'm just going to give brief summaries of each chapter, and then we'll get into discussion about them in detail. Let's go to chapter 11. This chapter talks about laws, specifically laws about what is clean or unclean, what you should eat and not eat. Okay, it gives the detailed dietary laws, distinguishing between clean and unclean animals. So it tells you how to identify which animal is clean and which one is unclean. This is where the Muslims got the idea of don't eat pork, or other people who say don't eat seafood. They got all that from here. And we will discuss this. Should we be following these laws? Are they good for us? Are they bad for us? Do they matter? We should discuss that. Okay? So we're given a description of land animals, sea creatures, birds, and insects, and they're all categorized. You know, you're told the things that are creeping, the ones that are webbed feet, have webbed feet, and so on and so forth. And you're told how to identify them and which ones you can eat and which ones you cannot. One that comes to mind when I was reading this talked about fishes or creatures in the sea. And it talked about those that have fins and I think scales. You can consume those. You know, think about what your favorite seafood. Does it have fins and scales? All right, these laws are given to promote holiness and distinguish Isolele from other nations. That's not the only reason they were given, but it was one of the major reasons. To distinguish us from the other nations. Just like Daniel said he would not eat certain foods, and after a week or so, he distinguished himself as being healthier than the other people. These dietary laws, were to help distinguish us from the other nations, so that they would look upon us and say, wow, what's your secret? Tell me how I can be like you. There's a scripture there I pulled up from chapter 11. It says, "For I am Zambi, your God. You shall therefore sanctify yourselves. You shall separate yourselves, and you shall be holy." So Tatan Zambi is saying, when you're doing this, you're making yourself holy, just like I am holy. Okay? Don't defile yourselves with any manner of creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. That's one of the animals that we're not supposed to consume. All right, chapter 12. This talks about purification after childbirth. So we get instructions of how women were to ceremoniously cleanse themselves after they give birth to a child. A woman is considered unclean for a set period depending on the child's gender. I think it talked about one gender, I think it was the boys. If the child was a boy, the period was like 33 days, I think, and or maybe it was a girl, I forget. But here you have specific instructions that the Most High is giving us. It's like insider information that he gave Isolele when they left Egypt. Notice he didn't give them this information when they were in Egypt, because he didn't want the information to be shared to the Egyptians. It was for Isolele, his chosen ones. And then there are also sacrifices that are prescribed for purification. There is a scripture there that I pulled from verse 2 and verse 3. And you see in verse 2 it says, "Speak unto the children of Isolele, saying, if a woman has conceived seed," means they are given birth to a boy, a man child, "then she shall be unclean 7 days. According to the days of separation for infirmity, she shall be unclean. And in the 8th day, that's when the flesh of the child is circumcised. On the 8th day, she is being unclean for 7 days. On the 8th day, now she's clean, and then they go on with the ceremonies. Now, it says down there in green, "And she shall then continue in the blood of her purifying 3 and 30 days." That's 33 days. I thought that was very interesting because several things happen in the Bible associated with that number 33. The Messiah lived for 33 years while he was here on earth. I wonder what the correlation is with the 33 days. We can discuss that. Okay, chapter 13, laws about skin diseases, leprosy. Woo, this one was fun. Okay, not that I enjoy leprosy, no. Guidelines are given for identifying and diagnosing skin diseases in this chapter. Priests are responsible for examining symptoms and declaring a person clean or unclean. Okay? Clothing which has mold or mildew is also addressed. One thing that I noticed here, first of all, is that the priest is dealing with a disease. So the priest is not only concerned with matters of scripture and spirituality, but they're also the village doctor. This is where the colonialists came into Africa and found our priests speaking to God and also healing us. And they said this was witchcraft. This is where our ancestors deviated from this practice of spirituality and health, and they deviated and became what is now referred to as sangomas or witch doctors, because they provide a dual role. You know, they have the spirituality aspect and they have the healthcare aspect. And people who don't understand it sometimes say everything they're doing is evil. Well, there are some who do evil, but there are some who don't do evil. This is where it came from, because the priest was doing both of these things. I can tell you for sure the priests in other parts of the world were not doing both of these things. This was a practice that was African. And there's a scripture there that I pulled up. And the priest shall look on the plague in the skin of the flesh, and when the hair in the plague is turned white, and the plague in sight be deeper than the skin of his flesh, it is a plague of leprosy. And the priest shall look on him and pronounce him unclean. Now it gets very interesting. Here in red, if the bright spot be white in the skin of his flesh, and in sight be not deeper than the skin, and the hair thereof be not turned white, then the priest shall shut him up that has the plague 7 days. So here's some food for thought for y'all who've not had this before. Tatan Zambi is telling the priests, if you look at somebody's skin and you know their skin looks different from the way it normally looks, look out for whether the skin has white spots in the flesh. Is there a white spot? So the question is, if the skin has turned white, what color was it before? That will tell you the identity of these Israelites. It says it right here. It talks about the skin and the hair, that they can turn white. Can white skin turn white? Or can black skin, so-called black skin, turn white? All right, Leviticus 14, cleansing of lepers and mildew. We're given procedures for the cleansing and reintegration of a person healed from skin disease. Okay, the lepers, the ones with leprosy. Remember COVID, during the COVID era, those few years where we were going into quarantine and you had to wait until certain symptoms were gone before you could reintegrate with the rest of your family. This was what these guys were going through. Okay, now we can relate. So the priest is the one who was given these instructions. They knew what to look for before they can determine whether somebody should be reintegrated into the community. There were also sacrifices and rituals to be performed by the priest. And regulations were provided for cleansing their homes and the garments of those who were afflicted with mold. You know, mold was seen by Tatan Zambi as unclean, and it is unclean. It makes you sick. So before they had the medical labs where they tell us that is science, Tatan Zambi had already given the science to Aaron and his sons. There's nothing new they're teaching us. It's always been with us. In fact, they stole it from us. And Tatan Zambi called it, this is the law of all manner of plague of leprosy and scab, and for the leprosy of a garment and of a house, and for a rising, and for a scab, and for a bright spot, to teach when it is unclean and when it is clean. This is the law of leprosy. Healthcare 101. Okay, Leviticus 15. Laws about bodily discharges from both genders. Regulations concerning bodily discharges from both men and women are given in chapter 15. Discharges cause ceremonial uncleanliness. Therefore, there is purification that involves washing and offerings. These laws emphasize purity and separation from defilement. Verse 31 there says, thus shall you separate the children of Isolele from their uncleanness, that they die not in their uncleanness, when they defile my tabernacle that is among them. Tatan Zambi's tabernacle was only among Isolele. It was not set up in another nation. And Isolele were being preserved from death by making sure they did not approach the tabernacle when they were unclean, because they would die. That's what Tatan Zambi is saying here. Make sure we get it so that we don't approach him when we're not holy, and then the holy distinguishes the unholy. Or he kills us, simply said. The Day of Atonement, chapter 16. It describes the annual Day of Atonement. This was the most solemn day in Isolele's calendar. That other community out there calls it something else. I will not even repeat what they call it. The high priest enters the most holy place and makes atonement for the sins of the people of Isolele. This was what happened on that Day of Atonement. 2 goats were used, one as a sin offering, the other as a scapegoat. It was actually released into the wilderness. That is where the word scapegoat came from. Now, how could somebody come up with the word scapegoat if they didn't even have goats? This is our history. This is our culture. It is not theirs. There's a scripture there in verse 34 of chapter 16. And this shall be an everlasting statute unto you, to make atonement for the children of Isolele for all their sins once a year. And he did as the Lord commanded Moses. My question is, and we'll discuss this, if it says everlasting statute unto Isolele, or to Isolele, should we still be doing it? Why or why not? Chapter 17, we see rules about sacrifices and blood. Blood. Sacrifices must be brought to the tabernacle. Unauthorized offerings are forbidden. When you read this chapter in detail, you realize that it was an offense to Tatanzambi to slaughter your animal out there and have a party. You had to bring it to the tabernacle, give an offering for it, and go with the rest of the animal that is not offered in the tabernacle as a burnt offering. You could go with it and consume it. But if you just killed an animal, had your party, your barbecue and all that, and you didn't bring it to the tabernacle, that was forbidden. Chapter 17 talks about that. Blood is considered sacred and must not be consumed, as it represents life and is used for atonement. That's why you hear the statement, you have blood on your hands, right? That's why you hear blood has been spilled. Why is that a big issue? Because it means that which represents life has been taken away, and that is the blood. This is where it came from. Why do we treat blood as something sacred? It's because it has life and it represents life, which is used for atonement. This chapter emphasizes centralized worship and reverence for blood. It says there in verse 11 of this chapter, for the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes an atonement for the soul. Therefore I say unto the children of Isolele, no soul of you, none of you, shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger that lives among you eat blood. This was a practice that would separate us from the rest. Last but not least, chapter 18 talks about laws on sexual morality. Prohibitions are given against various forms of sexual immorality, including incest, which is sexual relations with your relatives, adultery, which is sexual relations with a married person, homosexuality, which is sexual relations with a person of your gender, and bestiality, which is sexual relations with an animal or a beast. These are prohibited in chapter 18. Isolele is warned not to follow the practices of where they're coming from, Egypt, or where they're going, Canaan, in this chapter. These laws are foundational for maintaining Isolele's holiness and distinctiveness. We don't roll like that. simply put. Okay? I liked how this was described. Chapter 17 is talking about incest, and it says it is wickedness. Verse 17 in chapter 18, it calls it wickedness. Okay? Verse 22 calls it an abomination. This is referring to homosexuality. An abomination. That's what Nzambi calls it. Verse 23, he calls bestiality confusion. Okay? Confusion. You're confusing an animal for a human being. All right, family, that's it. Let's get into some discussion now.